Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 693. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we speak with Prateek Joshi. Prateek and I talked about the definition of AI, machine learning, and an approach to using AI in the real world. AI is in your future, and it won't be the Matrix or Skywarn. Prateek Joshi is the founder of Pluto Shift and a published author of 13 books on AI. He has been featured in publications such as Forbes, CNBC, TechCrunch, and Bloomberg. You can visit him at www.prateekj.com and at plutoshift.com. Both links in the show notes. Are you ready to talk AI? It's time for the interview. Prateek Joshi, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to join you here.
It has been a long time coming, and for those of you who don't know, sometimes things don't go exactly as planned. Last time we tried to do this, my wonderful internet provider provided me with lemons that we couldn't make lemonade out of, so to speak. I got to see what reconfiguring a modem looks like remotely. So everything's been better since then. Prateek, let's start with something that's really easy. And I'm sure that there's only one definition for this in the whole world. Let's talk about what is AI.
Actually, if you ask 1,000 people, you'll get 1,000 definitions. But to me, artificial intelligence is the ability of a machine to make intelligent decisions. It could be as simple as you type something into a search engine and does it understand what you're asking and does it provide the right answer, right? That's one form of intelligence. Let's say you are using a phone and the phone recognizes your face and unlocks it, right? That's another form of intelligence. So any machine that can exhibit these qualities, it's said to be an AI system. Now, what level of intelligence? That's a big debate. People are constantly making progress on how intelligent we can make a machine. And obviously, that's an active area of research. So that's how I look at AI.
Are there other... Well, I mean, let's face it. There are, people do machine learning. Once upon a time, back in my coding days, I built expert systems for trading currency.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have, we call them expert systems. I wouldn't, is that in the neighborhood of AI or is there some continuum here?
Yeah. The way we look at all these terms, AI is the goal and machine learning is a vehicle to get there. Now, it's not the only vehicle, right? So there are many, many different ways in which you can then take a machine and make it intelligent. You can impart intelligence, right? Expert systems, that's one way to do it. Machine learning. It could be really, really simple, like a calculator, right? It's not extremely intelligent, but it is something. So that's how there are different vehicles to achieve the goal of AI. And in this specific case, machine learning, the fuel for this vehicle is data, right? So that's how data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence kind of relate to each other.
Many of the listeners of this podcast live in the development world. Based on where you think AI is going in applications that power organizations, is this going to be part and parcel of pretty much everything that we touch? And so people really should start getting used to building this in?
If you look at how artificial intelligence came about, right, it's pretty fascinating because it existed for a couple of decades purely as a research topic, academia, textbooks. And it went from that to a very standalone application that you may or may not need. So it's so if you build something, it was called an AI application, AI project, AI something. And now it's going from that to being like a layer in every application that's getting built. Just like how, if you look at software before and after cloud, we're doing many of the same things, but now we are using cloud to deliver that software to our customers. So the same way, if you're building a system, let's say you're building a simple application where your users can ask questions and you'll provide answers. To do that, you need a machine to kind of understand what somebody's typing, because you might get a billion questions simultaneously. So in that way, if you build applications, be it a mobile application, be it a cloud application, if you look at the different parts of that stack, AI is becoming a part and parcel of every application that's getting built. And then again, these are very simple and specific tasks. That's where today's AI does a really, really good job. And really, that's how we are seeing AI becoming ubiquitous across a range of applications. And also the infrastructure providers like Amazon Web Services, Azure, and Google, they're also building a lot of these tools that you can just use out of the box. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel for anything. And you can just build an application that not only serves a purpose, but it's also smart. So I would say AI is like a nitro boost to an engine that already exists, right? So without the engine, nitro boost doesn't make sense. So like for example, if you are Amazon buying and selling of products, that's the core value. And AI obviously definitely accelerates that. If you look at Apple and Spotify, Google, a lot of them. So there's a core offering which is boosted by AI. So that's how a lot of the successful applications are being built today.
What's the path to value? I mean, is if you were to give advice to people in the startup market, what's the path to value? Is it to build the accelerator, or is it to build the engine and then look for the accelerator?
Yeah, I think that's the way to go about it. Is step one is identify, kind of build the engine. Engine being the core value you're providing to your customers or users, right? So for example, if Netflix didn't have any machine learning, I would still use it, because guess what? The core value is they're providing content, right? Watching movies or watching TV shows. Obviously, they're making the experience a whole lot better by using many different machine learning modules. But at the heart of it, providing content, that's the engine, right? So I think identifying your core engine, something that the customers would use with or without AI, I think those applications are best suited to be accelerated with different AI modules. So I think that's how I look at it. And really, when you're looking at an existing business, let's say you're a large business, you already have a large number of dedicated customers. The way to, and this is mostly applicable to large companies, the goal is when you're evaluating how AI can benefit you, I think step one is defining the scope and narrowing it down, and then kind of get users involved from day one, meaning pick a group of 5 to 10 people, let them test it out, and create a success template. Because in a large company, there are so many different moving parts that you just can't do a top-down, we're going to use this machine learning module across the entire company. It's just not feasible. And I think that's why creating a success template, creating a benefit scorecard where before we used AI, we spent this much on electricity. After we used AI, this is what happened. So I think the whole package, the business value, I think that's where you can create success templates which can be replicated within a large Fortune 500 company. So I think the different paths based on how big you are.
Does it make the most sense for the Fortune 500, or is AI and using AI as an accelerant? Does it make sense for the local plumber who has 32 trucks? driving around?
I think the application or other kind of making it useful, there are different ways that both of them can use it. Like, for example, let's say you're a large company and you manufacture beverage, right? I think the problem, or rather what you want to solve, I think identifying that, it starts from there. Meaning, let's say you want to reduce electricity consumption, right? And I think looking at all the data coming in and then using AI as a tool to drive that, that's different. Now, let's say you're a small business, you own a few trucks, you're servicing your local area. Let's say you want to do something simple like handle customer requests, right? So technically, you would need some people who are on it all the time, or you can have a simple AI virtual assistant who can answer basic questions from many people who are pinging you. So I think depending on what you're doing, you can narrow the scope all the way down. But at the end of the day, if you can take a simple task and automate it, that's it. That's how you get started with AI. So I've seen many different companies and businesses just leveraging what can be automated with like simple tasks. I think that's how you get started, and I think it can be applicable to companies of many different sizes.
Given your breadth of experience, which one is more fun in terms of helping, the Fortune 500 or the smaller organization?
I think both have their own viewpoints, and I think both can be fun. But in terms of the impact, like the size of the impact, obviously Fortune 500 companies are global, and thing is, if you let's say like a small 10% improvement could translate to many millions of dollars, right? Let's say you build a machine learning, you build an application that can identify spikes in electricity before they happen, then that could translate to enormous value to a Fortune 500 company. So that's on that scale. In terms of scale, I think Fortune 500 is where you go. But in terms of speed, meaning the speed at which somebody would use and embrace a new technology, I think small businesses are fantastic for that, because one, the repeatability is high, because if you look at a Fortune 500 company, they're so big, every company has their own unique constraints and challenges, because at scale you can't really copy paste anything. But if you're looking at a large number of small businesses, many of the tools or problems are repetitive. Meaning, if you build a small application that can serve a plumber, I think the same tool can serve 1,000 other businesses similar to that. So I think that's how it's a balance where you learn a lot by implementing this technology for thousands of small businesses. But in terms of scale of impact, I think Fortune 500 is where you can land and then expand pretty quickly.
Just to get maybe a bit personal at this point, before we dive in one more time, you have had an interesting career to this point, right? You're CEO of Pluto Shift. You've authored 13 books. How did you get from authoring books to CEO of an organization?
I think it started with, as a professional, I've spent my entire career building AI products, and a large portion of that, at least in the beginning, first half of the career, focused on digital or virtual infrastructure, right? And then, for example, AI appears a lot in search engines and e-commerce, but when it comes to the physical world, there's a pretty big gap, right? So during the books I wrote, they're mostly textbooks oriented towards developers who are building applications. And then through that process, realized that AI is not nearly as ubiquitous as it could be in the physical world. So that was kind of the core motivation behind launching Pluto Shift, is to bring AI to the physical world. So I think this journey of implementing or building AI products on different platforms, be it mobile, cloud, edge, and for a variety of use cases, kind of helped me see the gap. And when I first launched PlutoShift, the first use case was water, right? Any physical infrastructure that handles water, we should be able to help them. So that's how we got started. And again, the topic of water is close to my heart. I grew up in southern India in a town with no water. Right? It's a town called Gulbarga, and we didn't have any water growing up. So that kind of stuck with me. So I think here, not just in India, but obviously US and around the world, water is a pretty big and important issue. And I do think a tool like AI can help at least prevent wastage of this precious resource. So that's how the company was launched. And now obviously we serve different types of customers.
I assume that you're dealing with a range, right? So from the point of view of helping organizations get started in the AI with AI, is it the advice that you gave earlier about having that value understanding of how one gets to value, is that the place to start? Where would they start engaging you in Plutosoft?
The first place to look is there a problem that needs to be solved this year, right? And a simple example of that would be, let's say you are a company that manufactures like food products, and you just found out that your chemical costs are way too high, meaning you are using too much chemicals to treat your products. And so step one is, how can we reduce our chemical bills? Because usually chemicals it's raw material. You have to buy it from somewhere, make your product, and then your product gets sold. So raw material that goes into the product, you know at the start of the year, you as leadership, you think about, okay, what can I do this year? I need to reduce my chemical costs. Or another example would be, let's say you are a large company that manufactures beverage or manufactures a physical product that takes up a lot of electricity. So let's say you decide, okay, our electricity consumption is way too high. We need to reduce it because it's a resource that you use to make that product. So it directly contributes to the bottom line. So I think the reason I'm saying this is, start with a problem that needs to be solved, and then back into AI. Meaning, don't start with, okay, I need to use AI for something, and then figure out the problem. So I think just by defining the problem and then working backwards, it'll help you shape your AI application in a way that's going to drive that outcome. So this is how we engage with customers, and we have seen companies achieve a lot of success if they start with the problem and build AI applications that are specific to that problem. And then the good thing is, because these companies are so massive, they can scale it up across the entire organization. So I think that's where there's a lot of success. And also today, there is no single magical AI model that can do everything, right? So if you build an AI model, it has to be specific to something. And the more specific it is, the more accurate it will be. So I think define the problem, like narrow it down enough that AI can do its job really, really well. And that's when really great outcomes, you'll get those.
Getting data seems to be probably one of the core issues with any of this, building the data set or finding a way to actually monitor the, let's say it's physical infrastructure. Are those really the hard physical things to do, or is it coming up with the problem that you want to solve?
I think if you look at how a data scientist, right, how a data scientist spends his or her time, 80% of that is just data processing or data wrangling, right? Because data in the real world, data is messy, it's noisy, it's not consistent. It keeps going in and out. And for you to build an AI application that functions reasonably well, you need data to be at least structured and consistent in some way. So I would say that data collection, data, like centralizing that data, making it, kind of structuring it and making it consistent, that is a lot of effort. And for each of those tasks, many people, there are multiple like billion-dollar companies that have been built that do just that one thing. So I would say data is a hugely important part of this. And not just that, I think once you collect the data, what do you do with it? Or rather, kind of how do you prep it to feed it into a model? That is a very important topic. And so, yeah, I think once you decide what the problem is, like what do you want to solve, the next step is identifying data that is relevant, right? For example, if you want to reduce energy consumption, at the very minimum, you should have data about energy consumption. How much have you consumed in the last month, right?
Yeah.
So, and also a quick neighboring to that is, okay, I know I've consumed this much energy in the last 12 months. Now, what are the primary drivers of that consumption, right? Simple things like pressure and temperature and flow rate. So you should have some basic data that can then, so you can then use that to understand, okay, what levers can I turn to increase or decrease or at least impact this key metric that I'm trying to change, right? So I think that's how it works, identifying the problem, then identifying the relevant data, and then building that processing pipeline that converts that raw, unstructured data into something that can be fed into a model.
In your experience or in your observation, have you seen organizations go down this path with a problem to solve, get all the data, and then actually find out that either they can't affect the solution or the problem wasn't what they thought it was?
It happens a lot of times. Actually, it happens quite frequently. And the reason it happens is there are many different, every company has their own way of doing things. In this case, for an application to actually work, so many different things have to come together. That even if it's like multiplying 7 different things. If a single item is like 0, the whole result is 0. Like if you can take 100 big numbers, multiply it by 0, it's still going to be 0, right? So it's so in this case, what happens is, let's say the leadership said, okay, we gotta something about AI this year, right? So that's how usually it's that vague, and then the leadership level immediately below that. It's their job to figure out where can we do this, what department, who's going to lead this, and then after that they realize, okay, we want to reduce chemical consumption, but we have no data, right? So there we go. The initiative stops there. Let's say they do have the data, but then they have nobody to wrangle that data, no engineer. So again, it's out. Let's say everything is in place, but then what happens is people inside the organization, they don't want to use it. They're like, hey, who is this? No, this is an application, an AI thing. It cannot tell us what to do. So even if the AI tool is functioning, behavior change within the org, that's going to stop it from being successful. So there are many different ways to screw up, or rather kind of how to, AI won't work for many organizations because all these things have to come together for it to drive results. And the companies that do that, they're the ones who can reduce their electricity bill by like $5, $10, $15 million in year one, right? So, but it's not an easy thing to do because it's just companies that need it the most are not software companies, right? They're companies their primary expertise is they manage data centers, they manage beverage facilities, they they treat water, right? So they make chemicals. So they have their primary expertise is not AI. And so I think leveraging AI as a tool to drive business value, it just takes a lot of discipline and also a lot of, I think, mental agility, meaning is your org willing to embrace new tools, test it out, and make it work for you?
And change is hard. Prateek Joshi, yeah. Yeah, I think we all live in that world, whether it's AI or process or writing new applications. Yeah, change is not easy.
Right.
If you
Yeah.
woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you your caffeinated beverage of choice and gave you two wishes, that any two wishes, magic wand to actually make that happen, obviously, and said, "Hey, you can change any two things that impact how people leverage AI," what would they be and why?
The first one would be the scope of projects, meaning when a company or an organization decides to leverage AI, step one is very, very clearly define the problem, like define it, narrow it down, and just make it very specific, right? What an example of vague would be, oh, we want to be an AI driven company. Sure, that's a good statement, but it doesn't mean anything, right? So when I say define the scope, is just exactly know what is the outcome, what's the business outcome you want to achieve, and then plug in AI as part of that solution. It's not a standalone, separate type project that you're doing. So the first one is scope of projects, narrowing down. That's first. The second is behavior change. At the end of the day, I think people wanting to use a tool to drive an outcome, I think that matters a lot. So before a company embarks upon using AI or any new tool, I think before that, they should evaluate how willing their people are in terms of giving it a shot, right? If let's say if the company decides to build a new tool or at least use a new tool, is there a good way to test it? And they can then say, okay, we tested it, didn't work, or we tested it, it works. So, but I think giving it a fair shot starts with people. So I think behavior change, or at least having the agility to try out new things, and then kind of giving it a quick go/no go. I think that those organizations do phenomenally well, and I think that's the second one. So scope of projects and behavior change. Those are the two things I would change in terms of how orgs view AI.
Makes sense. Prateek Joshi, how can people continue the conversation? How can they find out more?
Yeah, if you want to learn more about me, please feel free to visit www.prateekj.com. And if you have any questions or if you want to discuss anything at all, you can email me at prateek@plutoshift.com.
Super. And I think, as you know, at this point, I open up the platform. You have educated us. There are a number of really interesting items in our conversation that I think people can use, whether they're tackling AI or not. There was some really good advice. We open up the platform for you to promote anything that you like. So the platform is yours.
Yeah, I think first of all, this has been a wonderful, wonderful discussion. And at the end of the day, I want to say if you look at how AI has benefited or how AI is being used, I think it's just a matter of making sure picking the low hanging fruit and automating it. That's how I would drive success. And beyond that, just for life or a career building or building a product, I think finding your core purpose, I think it matters a lot. And again, that's how I feel about building AI products. But I think for if you're working at a company, if you're building something, I think finding your core purpose, it just becomes a lot easier to keep going if you have that zen. And on top of that, I think surrounding yourself with great people is because their habits will rub off on you, and that's the fantastic part is, I think, go out of your way to make sure you surround yourself with great people. And lastly, learn how to be good at deploying your time, because time is your most precious resource, and people, waste it in all sorts of fashion. So I think it's important to deploy it wisely and spend your time on items that you're good at, right? And for items that you're not good at, hire experts, right? Seek experts and use their time and seek help. So I think at the end of the day, if you get better at deploying your time, I think it's going to compound a lot. I think that's what I wanted to share.
Truer words were never said. Prateek, again, this has been absolutely marvelous. Thank you for sharing your time with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me.
In Reread Saturday News, we had a bit of home repair this week, and I did not get the Week 10 reread of Agile Conversations by Douglas Squirrel and Jeffrey Fredrick completed. By the way, thanks to Laurie and Todd for the use of their condo. It was that kind of a repair. We'll be back next week. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, we will revisit the role of the team lead and the concept of self-organizing teams. Can they coexist? We'll also have a visit from Jon M Quigley, who brings his alpha and omega of product development to the cast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?